every 5 or 6 years, there's an era, there's a cycle, and then there's new kind of scammy things that happen. And of course, JP Morgan has been involved in an innumerable number of dubious things, and they've had to pay lots and lots of fines as a result of that. But here in this current cycle of altcoin collapse, the things that are coming out with the Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX are really mind-blowing in terms of how much money they actually blew. Like, the difference between what's happening here and what's happening in the rest of the world gets sharper. You know, I really feel like I'm living in a secret hideaway, tunneling into a place where there's life, things are happening, and it's verdant and growing, and the more I look outside, it seems like, oh my gosh, what happened out there? The big news, Stacy, without a shadow of a doubt, it's buzzing, it's lit up, the wires around the world. El Salvador passes new Bitcoin, or I should say securities law. I mean, this is big news. Yeah, I hear that phrase all the time. So basically, instead of, they're just saying that on a case-by-case study, basically we'll see what happens, and then we go to see how it works out. In El Salvador, I mean, the decision was made, hey, let's just create some securities laws, and it's a clear differentiation. There's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is money, and then everything else has got to go see the securities regulator. I mean, that's but there's no it's pretty clear cut, right? For me, it's fascinating in that over the past 40 years, being in markets, I've always been aware of when people get busted, whether it's Bernie Madoff or Ivan Boesky or Dennis Levine or Mike Milken, and then during the 90s, you had the dot-com era, you had Frank Quattroni. Remember, he was doing the IPOs at Credit Suisse, and he was engaging in what was called laddering, and that became a problem. And every 5 or 6 years, there's an era, there's a cycle, and then there's new kind of scammy things that happen. And of course, JP Morgan has been involved in an innumerable number of dubious things, and they've had to pay lots and lots of fines as a result of that. But here in this current cycle of altcoin collapse, the things that are coming out with the Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX are really mind-blowing in terms of how much money they actually blew, like $40 million on dry cleaning, that type of thing. They couldn't get Amazon to deliver to the Bahamas, so they shipped stuff in private jets. The excess here and the craziness, I think, hits a new all-time high. Bitcoin, the foundation, layer one, these new security laws open up a pathway for things like the volcano bond or volcano token. So that is now in play. But also, it means that you've got a lot of other potential things, securities that can come along, and it should attract a lot of entrepreneurs and financiers, right? I mean, if this is going to be the new Singapore or Hong Kong, that means you're going to attract a lot of folks who graduate from fancy schools who are looking around for something to do, and they see El Salvador, they see a fertile area for doing some great ideas, bringing them to life, and they're going to come here, right? So it's going to attract a lot of talent here. There's a brain gain. I heard that phrase recently, not a brain drain, but a brain gain. So going forward, we've got a whole year ahead of us here in El Salvador, and every month that passes, every week that passes, the difference between what's happening here and what's happening in the rest of the world gets sharper. I really feel like I'm living in a secret hideaway, tunneling into a place where there's life, things are happening, and it's verdant and growing, and the more I look outside, it seems like, oh my gosh, what happened out there? It's a remarkable story, certainly. So it says it's just getting started. So yeah. What's going on? Where is this heading? What's happening in 2023? The money is the hardest money ever. New securities laws are opening up the floodgates of securitization of things on a Bitcoin layer one. So it has the potential, some have said, to be another Singapore or Hong Kong. Is that overstating the fact, or is that within the possibility of possibility?
Of course.
And Sam Bankman-Fried there in the scam with FTT, the coin that he created, and then the shares in the company, of course, collapse. And one of the biggest shareholders in the company was none other than Tom Brady. So it seems like everything comes back to Tom in a way. So here he is holding this $50 million bag of worms as a result, which could extend his career, even further out than he has to play.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story that we've been covering for years. They just print money. They've been buying stock. Apple stock is one of their biggest holdings. And it's like all these companies that go around buying back their own stock, right? They borrow money from the Fed and other central banks when it was near 0%, and they buy back their own stock, and they get a price move in their stock, and the executive stock options go up. And then all these stock buyback programs are starting to fall apart as well. IBM was one of the first to really kind of fall apart and show negative returns even after all the stock buybacks. But we're seeing that across the board because it doesn't, you're not producing, you're not investing in growth of the company and capital, CapEx, right, to make your franchise grow. You're just borrowing to buy back your own stock, and then eventually the earnings are depleted and the stocks collapse. So, and we're seeing that now kind of across the board. But these central banks across the board are looking very weak, apparently in response, like the Central Bank of China is buying a lot of gold, and you see a lot of money moving into gold, and aggressively are buying gold for the first time in 50 years. And as a way to kind of insulate themselves from what looks like a lot of distrust all across the world between these banks. So inflation was being kind of hidden, and we didn't talk about it, even though there was asset inflation and things in the economy were busting up in price, but we didn't call it really inflation. And the CPI was not moving aggressively higher, and there wasn't really any inflation. Even a year and a half ago, people were still talking about deflation. Like, how are we going to fight this deflation? We're targeting 2% inflation. How are we going to get to 2% inflation? We need to print more money, because they were simply reporting on those aspects of the economy that would reflect the need to print more money, because all the people who held assets were benefiting by all the money printing. So what's interesting is that the mass cooperation of financial media to kind of portray these hoodwinks, this kind of shambolic behavior as financial news. And I think that's one thing that we've done a good job in, is kind of like piercing that veil. Remember that in just a couple of years ago, there was the toilet paper crisis. Apparently now we've got the egg crisis. So you can't have both. You can have the gas or you can have the egg, but you can't cook the egg because you can't afford both. So, the eggs are supposedly the problem is bird flu and some massive die-off of chickens. But apparently the truth from the farmers is that the price of stuff to raise the chickens, the feed, the energy, everything that goes into it, fertilizers, etc., are prohibitively expensive. So the farmers are simply walking away. They're not producing the egg. So the egg is a direct result of a breakdown in all of the parts of that economy that would support a healthy supply chain of eggs. So last I checked, $5 for maybe a dozen, from $1 just 18 months ago. That's a huge explosion in price. And clearly, eggs are a very fundamental part of the food chain. And eventually, of course, someone's going to have to look over the horizon to, at some moment, there being a massive pivot. So there must be some kind of pivot coming where there will be QE, whatever we're up to, 5 or 6, and the bond buying continues. Technology industry got co-opted, what we're learning from the Twitter reveals, and this shows a depth of behavior that is inconsistent with what you'd expect. And so now the decentralization with Keat and Hole Punch and these other technologies, this is a wave under the Freedom Manifesto Paulo Adorno is involved with, that you see really now going to get a lot of support, because I guess people are fed up. Startling thing about San Francisco is Silicon Valley. It's billionaires after billionaires, and the actual neighborhoods where they live are disgusting, right? So that was kind of a disconnect. And you see that everywhere now, in all major cities. So going out to the immediate future, we should look for news pertaining to Keat and Hole Punch.